So I'm going to talk about some stories of miners at Mogollon, and this picture here is exactly the topic that I'm talking about. This picture is probably taken about the 1910s, so I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the 1930s, but the woman I interviewed had this photograph from when her relatives had worked there earlier. So following the publication of my first book, I was at a book signing and this woman came up and talked to me afterwards, Lucille Hiron Montoya. And, we just got to chatting and I thought, oh, that's so interesting. She grew up in Mogollon in the 1930s. And so I asked if I could interview her and she agreed. And actually there was another woman who I ended up interviewing there as well, who grew up in Santa Rita. And that was the start of my oral history projects. So first of all, a little bit of background about Mogollon. Kind of the local pronunciation is Mogollon. Sometimes the more Spanish pronunciation is Mogollon. So either one of those works. And this is a map of the southwestern New Mexico. And up here you can see Socorro, where the conference was last year. So this is just a portion of New Mexico. And then this just shows the railroads. This is from an old map. And Silver City, and then Mogollon is up here, about 80 or 90 miles from Silver City. I'll go through just a brief history of the Mogollon Mining District to start off with. And it was discovered in the 1870s by James Cooney, and he was attacked by Indians in 1880 and killed. And so his body was buried in this big rock. They blasted part of the rock and put his body in there. And here you can see in the map, you can see that, whoops, you can see Cooney is right up in here on Mineral Creek. And then a few years later, Mogollon, the deposits were discovered over here on Silver Creek. So after James Cooney was killed, his brother Michael came to take over the operation of the mine. If you went on the tour of Socorro last year, you might have seen Michael Cooney's house. It's on the historic tour. And he was mayor of Socorro as well. So he developed the mine. Then, as I mentioned, the discoveries on Silver Creek. This is a postcard of Cooney, probably around 1910-ish. So kind of a small town, clustering of buildings, never too big. And the mine is around the corner, up the drainage just a bit. And here we have a picture of Mogollon, postcard, and continuing the brief history. Early 1900s, Ernest Craig introduced the cyanide process with the Last Chance mine. He was from England and then returned to England after he made his fortune in Mogollon. And some of his relatives continued to live in the Silver City area and recently met one of his descendants. And 1907 to about 1916 really saw peak production with the Socorro Mining and Milling Company. For a while there was a low ebb, and then what I'm going to talk about is the 1930s to 42 when the Black Hawk Consolidated Mines operated the Little Fanny Mine. So in this postcard, you can see the main street of Mogollon right here. Here's the what's now the Silver Creek Inn, what at the time was the Holland store, and then various buildings. And then as we'll see in other photos, we have these houses that are kind of built on platforms that were just carved into the side of the hill. And this is the schoolhouse right there. So we'll also take a look at Lucille's family history and how that's part of the Mogollon story. So these are her grandparents, Jacobo and Francisca Hiron. And Her family goes way back to the 1700s in New Mexico, but more recent history. In 1880, her great-grandfather on her mother's side, Miguel Pacheco, and others were killed by Apaches. They were hauling supplies near Reserve. And then Jacobo worked in the Cooney mine for a time, and he also had a farm near Frisco. So Lucille said that one time her father took her up to the Cooney mine area, up to Cooney, and he said, "Well, this is where I grew up wild." And what he meant by that was, unfortunately, Francisca died fairly young, and so the daughter here was sent to live with relatives, and then Lucille's father, who's pictured right here, and his brother were left to kind of fend for themselves, at least until Jacobo remarried, and then there was someone to take care of the children. So her father was Teodoro Huron. A little bit about his story. He served in World War I. That's him over here on the right. And then in the 1920s, he was a little worried about whether he was going to get married or not. And so he was bemoaning his fate to his father. And his father said, "I have the perfect one for you." And so they went over to Polvadera, which is just a little north of Socorro. And the Chavez family and the Huron family knew each other pretty well. And so he was introduced to Rosa Chavez, and they were married shortly thereafter. So the families knew each other, but they hadn't really known each other. So I thought it was interesting that their parents arranged their marriage. And then they went over to Miami, Arizona, where Teodoro worked in the mines over there, just over the border from Mogollon. And Lucille was born in December. Now, with the Great Depression starting, a lot of the mines shut down. And so Jacobo said to some of his relatives, "Well, why don't you come on over to Frisco?" He had a farm. He said, "We've got meat, we've got vegetables, lots to eat, place to stay." And so they went over there and then eventually made their way to Mogollon. And Lucille said that her first grade teacher was her aunt, Olympia Huron, and they just had a one-room schoolhouse over there in Frisco. But by the third grade, she was up in Mogollon. So here's the Fanny mine. So mining resumed in 1931. They got a flotation plant going. They started hiring men. And one of the reasons that some of the gold mines in the 1930s did pretty well is because the price of gold was raised by the government. And so it had been around a little over $20 an ounce for quite some time. And you can see the price went up. Now, I'm also going to be showing some photographs here from Russell Lee. He was a Depression era photographer for the farms, I think it was Farm Security Administration. And so his task was to go around the country photographing poverty that people were living in and the Roosevelt administration's attempts to alleviate that poverty. He went around the country for about 6 years and took just thousands of photographs. And one of the places he went was Mogollon, where he took over 100 photographs. Those are on the Library of Congress. You can download them there. And quite a nice collection of photographs showing many different aspects of life at Mogollon. So you can see just from census records. So in the number of residents at least doubled. Some of the figures in the newspaper put the number of residents at various times even higher than the 500 counted in the 1940 census, but an increase in households as well. And Russell Lee really specialized as well as like photographing people. So we have a lot of great photos of the people who were living there. Okay, so Mogollon district was both gold and silver. So when the price of silver increased, that also increased profits and what the companies were able to take in. So you can see the production figures just under $600,000 in 1938. And by 1940, you can see the figures there, 125 men employed in the mine and mill and 50 men in other operations as well. In terms of income, I just calculated some figures from the census to give a rough idea of what the incomes were. So miners who worked nearly full-time, 47 to 52 weeks, had an average income of, you can see there, 1,150. If you look at median household income, it came in at $1,000. Now that's a little bit less than median household income in the West or the rural non-farm income in the West. So, the newspapers pointed out that, due to the mines employing people and there was virtually no unemployment in Mogollon, so that was a good thing. And I think there was a quote that said that due to the mines, the worst phases of the Depression never manifested themselves in this section. So at least, the employment was good for people, but they weren't making huge salaries either. So at least, getting a paycheck, but not even, probably a little bit less than the medians. Now, there were a few people who made a little bit more money. So here you can see the salary range there were 3 different cable hoist operators. And I'm not sure who this guy was here because Russell Lee did not put any names, which I don't know if there's any separate documentation where he might have noted the names. If anybody knows of any, I'd be happy to hear about it. This guy here, the butcher, Ellsworth Tipton, you can see his salary, or the range of salary for 3 different butchers in Mogollon. And I knew his daughter, Polly Tipton. She had a place in Glenwood down in the valley. And I stayed at her place several times. She had a place where she rented out rooms, a little motel there. A really nice woman, fun to talk to. And unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago. Now, this book, talking about Grass Valley and Nevada City in the 30s, as you can see the title, No Depression Here, makes the point that, in this gold mining area, that people were doing quite well. Again, no unemployment. And this district, I don't know a whole lot about it. I did kind of skim through most of the book, but you can see that a lot more men employed than at Mogollon, and the average income probably about 1.5 times what the men were making at Mogollon. Now that's just based on in his book, he gives a figure of about that as an average income of people working in the mining industry. So maybe some areas made out a little bit better than what miners were doing in Mogollon. So back to looking at Teodolo, here is the Little Fanny Mine is where he worked. This is a postcard from about the 1910 era. And you can see that some people made substantially less. So he only worked 34 weeks in 1939. This is based on the 1940 census. And so he only made $612. And so I don't know what else he might have been doing if he was farming or what else he might have been doing for the other weeks of the year. But, certainly there's a range of the amount that people worked and their salaries. Now, this is what he was doing. He was operating a pneumatic drill. And Lucille said, that there was no protection. There was nothing for the mouth, only for the hat. So the helmet there, but there was no protection from all the dust that was kicked up in this kind of a drilling operation. And here's a couple ore samples, silver and gold ore. You can't really see the gold flecks too well in the photo, but The dark streaks in there probably is the silver ore there. And here's just a couple other photographs showing the men at work. Again, really great portraits of working men. And I really kind of started looking at Russell Lee's photographs a few years after I talked to Lucille. And I wish I would have asked her about them because I bet she would have been able to at least identify some of these people to know who they are. But I just never got back to it, you know. You know how it is. I was working at the time and other projects and this and that. So, but still, the photographs are really, really great. So I'll talk a little bit about some social aspects of life in Mogollon, some of Lucille's pictures and some of Russell Lee's pictures. So by one newspaper account, you can see the population was described as 900 people. So, you know, take your pick of numbers. And the school had quite a few pupils. So, you know, the men came with their families and they had 6 teachers. Two of the teachers were the Colliers, and they each made $900 each. So they were doing pretty well for their school year. And this picture here is a catechism class. And I think this woman in the back here is Rosa Chavez. I believe that's her, Lucille's mother there. Now, this is the Huron household. It was a former boarding house, which you kind of see like the multiple doors here, kind of gives you the feel for that. And she lived here with her mother and father, and her uncle lived with them as well. Now, this is Silver Creek, which runs part of the time. And during the monsoon season, they get a lot of flash floods. And so here you can see along the banks, lining the banks, are cyanide cans, which had all kinds of uses after their use in the mill. So they didn't just toss them away, they used them for housing, and here they're used to line the banks. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And Mogollon was subject to flash flooding at times, and so the surrounding hillsides had been denuded of the trees in the early days, and so that's a problem. And with recent fires that have been there in the upper drainages, that was a real problem a few years back as well. Okay. Whoops. Now I think this is her uncle. That's why I have the question mark there. So Lucille told me that her uncle, Herminio Chavez, was a barber. He went to barber school in Albuquerque, and then he went down to Mogollon when they were there. You could see his income listed there. And then this is Russell Lee's photographs, which he just has the generic titles that you can see there. And so I kind of put those two things together. He's the only barber listed in the census, and here he is on Main Street in his shop. And her family was Catholic, of course, and here they had processions through town. This on the second other photo here, that's Lucille right up in there. And here's the priest. The priest only came up there about once every 6 months. He didn't like driving up to Mogollon, and if you've ever driven up there, you know why. So still, it's a very windy, narrow road in spots with a pretty good drop off. So I guess that was enough to keep the priest away. But Lucille said that they were practicing Catholics. They practiced by faith, as she said. So that was an important part of civic life. And Lucille was part of the effort to bake dinners and sell dinners to raise money for the building of the Catholic Church here. Juan and Amelia Araujo, those were family friends of the Hurons. They had lived over in Miami as well. And so Juan actually had been a miner in Mogollon in 1920. They were actually born in Spain, and then they went to Cuba, and then they came to the United States. So they were storekeepers in Mogollon. You can see their income there, pretty decent for the time. And you can see Juan is buried there in the Mogollon Cemetery. And after the mines closed in 1942, Doña Amelia and her son, and I think daughter-in-law moved to, I think it was, where is it, Bayard? So they moved on and established a store there. And Lucille really liked going to the store. She liked to buy boxes of coconut there, so kind of interesting to see the kind of goods they would have had in a small mining community. Lucille really liked growing up in Mogollon, and she could go on all these different pathways to the different houses and visit her old lady friends. She really liked older people. And so you see her here with Doña Francisca, and that's Doña Francisca's house. You can see again this building up of the terraces here. So they could just squeeze a house on that area. And here's Russell Lee's photograph, kind of showing the same thing. You can see the terraces there for all these different houses. And if you go there now, most of these houses are gone because they took away the lumber and, did something else with the stuff. So you see a lot of these terraces up on the hillside. And then these are Lucille's Chavez relatives. So they were from Polvadera, and that's her mother's side of the family. I think this is just so interesting because you have the terrace here, and then you have this second story that's kind of just built right into the hillside there. So here's the Higgins Bar. So this is Russell Lee's photograph here on the left, and then the photograph on the right is Lucille's. She said that Dan Kelly gave her that photograph, and again, that looks like a real early one from probably from the 1910 era. And relatives of Lucille's had, one had married a Kelly and another had married a Higgins. So there was some intermarriage with those two families as well. Dances were very popular. Lucille loved to dance with her uncle and with the Higgins that she had mentioned. And here's Russell Lee's photograph. Maybe a bit of a stretch calling this an orchestra. But again, people just like to get out and dance and have fun. And dances were for the whole family. You can see the kids sitting there on the bench as well. And there was a lot of Mexican music that came up as well, is what Lucille said. So traveling musicians. This guy over here, Eduardo de la Torre, he was a family friend as well. You can see him there with his guitar. And he worked for Mrs. Baggy. So there was the Last Chance Mine was the other big mine in Mogollon, and it was operated by, or it was leased by Nils Olaf Baggy, and then he died, I think, in 1941, and his daughter, Belinda Baggy, had been helping him run the mine, and then after he passed away, she took over operations. So Lucille mentions that Eduardo worked for Mrs. Baggy for a time. Another aspect of life was movies. So there was a couple named Romero who came up from reserve and they brought movies. And so Lucille describes that she went probably in one of these buildings here. She said it was across from the Holland store, which is right here. So this is the main street of Mogollon. And so this couple came and they brought movies weekly. I don't know if it was every week, but at least fairly frequently, and the kids could go watch movies. And the houses had electricity. There was a light plant, so provided electricity for the mines, of course, and then at least some electricity to the house. Lucille recalls that she really liked reading, and so she would hide under the covers at night with her light, and she would read when she wasn't supposed to. So at least some of the houses had electricity to them. So some production figures at the Little Fanny, you can see the numbers there. So bullion shipments, that's in dollars. That was increasing from 1940 to 41. And also just, tonnage of ore milled gives you some idea of what was going on there. And here, Russell Lee's photographs of precipitation tanks at the gold mine. And he also did quite a few other photographs. I could have included a few more maybe, but he showed several different aspects of how they were mining and milling the ore. So in 1942, in June, the Fanny mine closed, which was a few months ahead of the official order. So when World War II started, the emphasis was placed on war production. Everything was geared to minerals that would be useful in the war effort. And Roosevelt said that gold mines were not a part of that. So his administration issued this order to close down the gold mines. And so that's effectively what ended that era of mining in Mogollon. So this is a the painted clock. As you come into the town, this is on one of the rock walls there, signifying the time when the mines closed up. Okay. Now the Huron family moved to Bayard near Silver City, and her father worked at another mine for a short time, but he died of lung cancer in 1944. So, of course, we don't know for sure if that was mining related, but certainly, working in the depths of the mine, probably not too good for the lungs in many respects. And so, he died a fairly young man in his early 50s. After that, Lucille got married. She met her future husband and got married. I think it was shortly after that. So if you go to Mogollon today, it's a great place to go and visit. I enjoy going there. Have gone there several times over the years. Unfortunately, not recently. Love to get back there sometime. But here you can see what the main street looked like in 1940. And then in the 60s and 70s and on, there have been some artists and other folks moving in there. So Stan King moved in and restored the Holland store, and it's now a bed and breakfast, a really great place to stay if you ever get a chance to get up there. It's looking pretty good. This picture was taken probably about 12 years ago, but it's still open and running, and great little restaurant there. If you have time, make sure they're open before you go up there. But great restaurant and pies and a few other businesses there as well, and they do have a museum. Okay, so that's my presentation. I'll stop sharing and be happy to field any questions that you have.
Oh, do you have something?
Yeah, is there any activity happening in Mogollon now with the higher prices of gold and silver?
I haven't really been down there lately. I know that there was interest in mining in Mogollon. Some of the local residents, like Stan King, I had heard were opposed to it because they had concerns about all the heavy machinery going up that road and going in to try to mine it. So I'm not really sure exactly what is the latest on that. I mean, I can just tell you that there was interest and some opposition by at least some of the local folks up there as well.
Well, I want to thank you, Jane. I think that particularly I really enjoyed those photos, and that reminds me to go back to Library of Congress and look up some things that I need to look up. So, but I thought it was very, very nicely put together. So thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you, Jane.
Sylvia.
Anyone,
Thank you, Jane.
anyone have any other topics or announcements or anything?
I've kind of spent some time trying to download all those photos just to have them and look at them, and from the Library of Congress website. Of course, doing that kind of thing isn't always the most interesting thing to do. It's kind of tedious, but at least it's nice to have the photos and look at them. And I'll probably go back there sometime. I'm just hoping it's a matter of timing and when I can get back there to, I kind of like the before and after shots or then and now shots. And there's a lot of really great hiking around there too. So going up Cooney Canyon is really an incredible hike. It's a kind of a box canyon, very narrow. It's kind of amazing. They actually got material up there. But it's a wonderful hike at this point since the road's been mostly washed out and there's a trail up there. So it's always an interesting place to go, but also very remote. It was quite a ways from Socorro when we had the conference there last year. And then, it's a ways from Silver City. So there's just not really a lot. It's a very remote place on the edge of the Gila wilderness.
Jane, I just did a very quick search on Google, and I do see an outfit called Summa, Summa Silver, that claims to have a Mogollon project underway. Summa Silver. I don't see much about it yet. I haven't read through this, but it appears that they're looking to develop both silver and gold. Summa Silver.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard of them. I think it was last year that I just saw an announcement that Stan King and was sponsored. They had made a movie. I don't know if they made it or somebody made it that was kind of arguing against the project. So that's about all I know. And I think that Kathy is still running the Purple Onion Cafe. Last I heard, I don't know if anybody else on here knows anything more about that, but some of the folks who've been up there a while, didn't really like the idea of it being redeveloped, but it remains to be seen what happens with that.